So I was 24 years old, and I was certain that I was having a heart attack. I was 24 years old, and I was for sure that I had a heart attack because I felt like somebody was standing on my chest. My left arm was tingling. I was short of breath, and I couldn't sleep. And so I went to the doctor, and I was thinking, this can't be happening. I'm 24 years old. And I went to the doctor, and they did a bunch of tests. They did an EKG. They hooked me up to a heart monitor for 48 hours that I walked around with. And then I came back from my appointment, and the doctor said, there's nothing wrong with your heart. Your heart is completely healthy. And then he looked at me, and he said, how's the stress in your life? Is everything okay at work and at home? And I was thinking, I'm 24 years old. I can't believe that he's talking about stress. I don't even have kids yet. How can I be so stressed out? And it didn't help too that he had this intern who was a girl my age who was beautiful, and she was looking at me kind of with pity in her eyes, just being like, you're stressed out. It's not your heart. It's something going on in your life. It's causing you to feel this. But I was thinking, how can this be? I feel like I'm having a heart attack. I have all the symptoms. And they were real. Those feelings were real. But there was nothing wrong with my heart. I was stressed out. I was stressed out. At the time of my life, I had some big decisions before me. I was stressed at work. I had bitten off more than I could chew. And I was stressed. And it manifested itself in physical ways. Now, I don't think this is an uncommon story. In fact, I think science has kind of proven, too, that stress can do a number on our bodies. Stress can cause things like a heart attack. Stress can cause things like insomnia, depression, eating disorders, diabetes, cancer, what have you. Stress is a very real killer in our lives and in our society. We suffer, I think, in America today and across the globe from stress, from overwork, from worry. In fact, I was just reading an article a couple weeks ago about Japan and some of their culture around work and how they work, and some of them are putting in so many hours that some are blaming suicides on the fact that they are working too much. People from these big companies who are committing suicide, young people too, because they're overworked. It is, I think, in some ways, an epidemic in our culture, is this idea that we have to be so productive and use every minute of every day to do something and get it done. And what I want to do today is talk about Sabbath. Because as I've said before, if the devil can't make you bad, he'll make you busy. Carl Jung said that hurry is not of the devil, it is the devil. Have you ever just been in a hurry, but you don't know why? It's the devil. Today I want to talk about Sabbath. I want to talk about rest, but not just any kind of rest. I want to talk about soul rest. Rest for your soul. That is Sabbath rest. Let's pray. Lord, open our hearts and our minds to your word this morning as we reflect on what has been read. And Lord, may we truly know the ultimate Sabbath rest in you, Jesus. We pray this in your name. Amen. So, a little bit about the background of Sabbath. Sabbath is the Hebrew word for Sabbath is Shabbat. Shabbat, and it is the Hebrew word for rest, cease, stop. That's what Sabbath means. Shabbat means stop, cease, rest. And the Jewish people, when they celebrate Shabbat, they say Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, it's their greeting. And it's Sabbath peace to you, essentially is what it's saying. Sabbath peace to you. Shabbat Shalom. That when we practice Sabbath, there is a peace that comes from it. Shabbat Shalom. The word Sabbath comes from the very beginning of the Bible in Genesis chapter 2 in the creation stories, where it says that after 6 days of creating the heavens and the earth, God took the seventh day and rested. He rested from his creativity. He rested from his work to be refreshed. In Exodus 20, verses 8 to 11, which were read earlier, we see that Sabbath is one of the 10 commandments. Did you know that? This honoring the Sabbath is one of the 10 commandments. And it says to keep the Sabbath holy, which means set apart. To set it apart from the other days, that the Sabbath day is different than the other 6 days. Notice that it says nothing about having a 2-day weekend. It just says have a day of rest. 1 day of rest, 6 days of work. That's the rhythm that God has put in place ever since creation. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. Now, the Jewish people, they celebrate Shabbat from Friday at sundown to Saturday at sundown. If you go to Israel today, which is obviously has a large Jewish population, you will see, we saw when we were driving through there last year, that everything's like closed down. There's not a lot of people on the highway because they observe the Shabbat religiously. From Friday at sundown to Saturday at sundown. Now, Christians, we kind of see our Sabbath as Sunday, right? I think many of you would say being at church today is part of your Sabbath, is part of this practice in your life. And the reason why Christians celebrate Sabbath on Sunday is because it is the day of when we remember the Lord's resurrection. Remember that it said that after the Sabbath, the women went to the tomb early in the morning, that Sunday morning, the first day of the week. And so for Christians, Sabbath is not the last day, it's the first day. It's a reminder that God is alive and that he is risen and that things are renewed. And so may we experience that renewal of Sabbath on that first day, Sunday, as we celebrate the resurrection of our Lord. Now, here's the reality is some are going to practice Sabbath on Friday, some are going to practice Saturday, Sunday. Personally, I practice Sabbath on Monday because I work on Sunday. I love my job, though. I love work. But I work on Sunday, right? But Monday is my Sabbath. What is your attitude around Sabbath? When you think of Sabbath, do you just kind of think, oh, it's like it's just one of those religious things, and it's an Old Testament thing. It's something that Jewish people do, not as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, I don't need to do this. Do you ever think that? Or do you ever think, oh, Sabbath, yeah, that sounds nice. I wish, Ben. Thanks. But I just can't do it. I got too much to do. My company expects me to answer emails on Sunday. Whatever it might be, you come up with excuses. You come up with, what is your attitude around Sabbath? Are you willing to give it a try? Do you want to learn more about it? Notice that the Sabbath is not a suggestion in the Bible. It is a commandment. It is a commandment. It's one of the 10 commandments. In fact, it is the 4th commandment, and it is the longest of all the commandments. It's right next to those other commandments like do not kill, do not steal, do not commit adultery. You know, you think when you hear about somebody who's killed somebody or stolen something or committed adultery, you might judge them and be like, oh, I can't believe they did that. But then we see some people breaking the Sabbath all the time and we don't judge them. Why is it that we pick and choose the sins? Sabbath is a commandment from God. And the reason it's a commandment is we're not to practice it out of duty, but because it brings life. It brings life to our life. That's why all the commandments, the 10 commandments, are there to bring us life. Not to, make life not fun. No, it's there to bring life. The Sabbath. In fact, we've created a lot of silly rules around the Sabbath as humanity. If you go to Israel today, they have a thing called the Shabbat elevator. And I personally, I just feel like it's silly because what it does is it goes from one level, it just goes one level at a time, and then it goes all the way back down, and it just cycles through this all day during the Shabbat. And the reason is because the strict Jewish people they believe that hitting a button on the elevator is work. And so they can't do that on the Sabbath. And so this way, the elevator just goes for them to the next floor. And they just wait until it gets to the floor that they want to go at, and then they get off, and they'd never had to work. We create silly rules sometimes. In fact, the Bible talks about how in the Old Testament, if somebody doesn't honor the Sabbath, they're to be put to death and to be cut off from the people. Now that might seem kind of harsh to you, that if you don't honor the Sabbath, that you will be put to death and cut off from the people. But if you think about it, it's kind of true. Because when we don't honor the Sabbath, when we don't rest, when we don't take that time that we need to find renewal, sometimes we do die. We die from some sort of stress-related illness, right? And sometimes we are cut off from people when we don't honor the Sabbath, when we are working so much that we lose touch with our family members, our kids, our spouse, our extended family, because we're just work. We do get cut off from people, estranged, our relationships. So in fact, those Old Testament rules that if you don't obey the Sabbath, you'll be put to death and cut off from the people practically kind of happen if we don't take that time to find rest and restoration and renewal in the Lord. Now, purpose of Sabbath. In Exodus 31, verse 17, it says, "On the seventh day, God rested and was refreshed." God rested to be refreshed. If God needs to be refreshed, who's the maker of the heavens and the earth, and we're God's creation, we need to find rest too. There's these friends that Addie and I have. They're named Dave and Arlene. Dave is a mentor of mine. He's been somebody who I've looked up to because he just lives in the presence of God, and he's such a wonderful man. He's taught me a lot about the love of Christ. Anyway, they were coming through Seattle one time when Addie and I lived in Seattle, and they stopped in for a weekend at our house. And it was like this unexpected, spontaneous Sabbath weekend that we weren't even planning on. Dave and Arlene came, and we enjoyed this weekend of walking through the Arboretum, and it was the fall season, and the colors of the trees were like orange and red and yellow and even purple. And then we went home, and David started making some food in the kitchen, and we opened a bottle of wine, and some people were having a conversation, others were napping. We invited a friend over, we had conversation, we were nibbling on food. We went to church, we talked about God. It was this day of rest and renewal that was so enjoyable. When we were done, Addie and I felt like it's still a weekend that we talk about and we remember today because it was so restful. And it was in community, and it was holy, it was set apart. And it felt like after that day, we had just rested for a week. That's how we felt, because it was so restorative. Sabbath. In Isaiah chapter 58, verses 13 to 14, I want to reread this to you because I think it says so much about the purpose of Sabbath. It says this: "If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy." Do you see that? Joy, delight, and joy in the Lord. "I will cause you to ride on the heights of the land and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. The mouth of the Lord has spoken." When he says, "I will cause you to ride on the heights of the land," that is a term from Deuteronomy that talks about the abundance of life in the promised land. That when we practice Sabbath, there is joy and delight in it. It's not meant to be this religious thing that is like a burden. No, it's something that's supposed to bring life to our life. Sabbath. It's also a time when we recognize God's abundance in our life. Because I think sometimes the reason we don't practice Sabbath is because of fear. We worry that if I take a Sabbath, then I'm going to get behind at work, or I'm going to get behind at home, or I'm not going to be able to do those things that need to get done. There can be a sense of fear, and that's a reason why we don't follow the Sabbath. But the Sabbath requires faith. Faith and fear are opposite. Sabbath requires faith to trust that God will provide in the midst of that day off. I think so often we try to fill our days with so much stuff, right? We always want to do as much as we can, especially in the summer here, right? In the summer in Jackson, we just want to fill it with so much, and by the end of the summer, I'm always exhausted because we just packed it all in, right? And there's this thing called FOMO. Have you heard of FOMO? Fear of missing out. It's an acronym, fear of missing out. We all experience FOMO, fear of missing out. So we want to just pack our days full of stuff, doing all these things, being on all these boards, Bible studies, go to parties, do all these recreational events, because we have this fear that we're going to miss out. Fear of missing out. But I love, Brene Brown coined a new term. She calls it JOMO. JOMO, the joy of missing out. And she talks about how it's like you can find this joy in just like being at home and not worrying about the fact that you're not out climbing the Grand or rafting the river or at that meeting, that you find the joy of missing out. JOMO. So don't have FOMO, have JOMO. JOMO. Because Sabbath is, in some ways, you're missing out on, you're saying no to something, but you're saying yes to God. And you're saying yes to renewal. You're saying yes to restoration. You still might not be convinced. I want to use an example of a business, Chick-fil-A. How many of you, when you go to Idaho Falls, are like the Pascals, and you go into Chick-fil-A, and you grab lunch, and you let your kids play in the playground? We love Chick-fil-A. Did you know that Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays? The owner's a Christian, and he is intentional about having Sundays off. And from a business perspective, you might be thinking, well, you can't take Sundays off because that's like the busiest day. That's one of the busiest days of the week. People are off. They're going to have lunch at your restaurant, right? He says, I don't care. I'm going to honor the Sabbath. And for me, I'm a Christian, so it's going to be Sunday. And did you know Chick-fil-A is a thriving business with loyal customers and great financial standing, and they take the Sabbath. So why can't we? Jesus also said that the Sabbath is for healing and doing good. He was ridiculed by some of the Pharisees for healing people and doing good on the Sabbath. And Jesus says, no, you know what? The Sabbath, it's okay to do good, to love your neighbor, to bring healing into people's lives. It's not just about yourself. It's not just a selfish day. It's a day for the Lord. Now, there's challenges of practicing the Sabbath. You still might not be convinced. I would like to remind you that the Sabbath doesn't just happen. It's intentional. Sunday doesn't roll around, or Saturday, whatever your Sabbath day is, it doesn't just roll around and all of a sudden it's your Sabbath. No, you have to plan and prepare for Sabbath. I mean, from maybe a bigger perspective, with our sabbatical that we're embarking on tomorrow, we've been planning this for 1.5 years. We wrote the proposal with a detailed itinerary over 1 year ago for this grant that we got. There's been preparation. It doesn't just happen. It takes intentionality, and that's the same is true for your weekly Sabbath. How do you prepare for it? Now, here's the story of Martha and Mary. Jesus shows up, and Mary is at the feet of Jesus, learning from him. As a woman would have been a big deal as a disciple of his in those days. And she was learning from him, and Martha was busy in the kitchen, and Martha was complaining, and she was overwhelmed, and she was stressed out. And you notice if you read that passage, Martha says, me, 3 times. And in some ways, Mary's saying, Lord, 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 I want to be with you in your presence. And I've often thought, if they only were prepared, because I think Martha gets a bad rap. I mean, hospitality is important. And if Jesus is in your home, you should cook him a nice dinner, right? So Martha gets a bad rap, but sometimes I just wish, if they could have just prepared. If Mary and Martha would have prepared everything beforehand, and then when Jesus got there, they could both rest at his feet and learn. And so we got to do both. We got to prepare and also find that time to be at Jesus' feet, to help each other out and to prepare. Another example of Sabbath as preparation. For those of you who have had kids, you would resonate with this story. When Addie was pregnant with Nina, we were preparing all that we could for Nina's arrival. We painted the room, we got the car seats in the car and had the person come and test them. Did anybody do that? We went to the classes, we got all the stuff at Babies R Us, which was such a weird store. This huge store full of baby stuff. I mean, we got all this stuff, right, to prepare. We got our bags packed for the hospital. And so when Nina came, which she was a little late, so we had a little extra time, unlike Graham. But when Nina came, we were prepared. And we were able to hold her. And when I remember holding Nina and feeling like all of time stopped, everything ceased. Remember, Shabbat means stop and cease. Everything stopped and ceased. And when I was present with Nina in this holy moment, but I prepared. We were prepared for that. It also came, in an unexpected time, but we were ready. And I feel that's what Sabbath, you got to prepare for it so that you can receive it and hold it and open it up and enjoy it. Sabbath preparation. So some examples of Sabbath in Jackson Hole, because I know we're a resort community and people work odd, days and shifts and all that sort of thing. Maybe you can't have the traditional Friday night to Saturday night or the Sunday, but perhaps you have another day that you could do it. And if you can't do a whole day, maybe you can do a little bit of a day. For instance, once a week, Addie and I have recently taken Wednesday mornings to just have coffee and have conversation. And this is something that it's only about an hour, but I show up a little bit later to work, but we have this time of coffee and conversation, and it's like a mini Sabbath in the midst of our week. You can take a Sabbath from technology. There's a bunch of techies that have created this thing called Sabbath Manifesto, where they have vowed to, create boundaries in their life so that they're not always on their devices. Really, what you need to do is just do it. Sabbath. Do it. Try it. Even if it's just once. Do it. Go for a walk on your Sabbath. Hike. Sleep. Tell stories. Watch a meaningful movie. Enjoy conversation. Read. Sing songs. Reflect in silence. Exercise. Celebrate. Cook. Eat. Drink. Be open to spontaneity. Frederick Buechner describes Sabbath in this way. The room is quiet. You're not feeling tired enough to sleep or energetic enough to go out. For the moment, there is nowhere else you'd rather go. No one else you'd rather be. You feel at home in your body. You feel at peace in your mind. For no particular reason, you let the palms of your hands come together and close your eyes. Sometimes it is only when you happen to taste a crumb of it that you dimly realize what it is that you're so hungry for, you can hardly bear it. Are you hungry for some rest? For a Sabbath? Sabbath is a reminder of God's grace. Ultimately, Sabbath is a reminder of the grace we have in Jesus Christ. Remember, it's not by works that we are saved. It is through grace. It's not by what we do. It's by the fact that we are. Matthew 11, Jesus says these words. come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. My friends, the ultimate Shabbat Shalom is in Jesus Christ, where we truly find rest from the burden and weight of our sin, and we find the life that is truly life. And we find that peace that surpasses all understanding. Shabbat Shalom in Jesus Christ. And if you think about it, Sabbath, I think, is a foretaste of heaven. It's a gift of grace. Have you unwrapped it? If you think about it, Sabbath as a gift, have you unwrapped it? Or is it just sitting there, wrapped up, never experienced it? Unwrap the gift of Sabbath grace. And if you're still not convinced, I have words of wisdom from Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh. You need to remember who you are, Winnie the Pooh says. People say nothing is impossible, but I do nothing every day. Doing nothing often leads to the very best of something.